doing? Good to see you. Happy Saturday. It is 20 minutes to midnight. I am here in my lovely Brooklyn apartment, and I'm ready to talk to you and have a conversation with you. Be sure to hit the like button. Be sure to hit the subscribe button. Be sure to hit the notifications bell. Always good to hit the notifications bell. Always good to hit the notifications bell. Always good to post this on your Reddit, post this on your Facebook, post this on your Twitter. For those who may be just joining us or new, the way we do this here is I give some opening remarks, which are sometimes long, sometimes brief. After I give those opening remarks, I then do a roll call where I call you out as I see you, names and locations, names and locations. Then after that, I answer your super chat questions until we're done. And so the longer you keep asking super chat questions, the longer I stay on here, which we're already starting pretty late, so it could be a late night. But it's up to you. Your super chats make it happen. As you super chat me, I write them down. I write the super chats down, and the second half of the show is me answering your super chat questions. That's how it works here. So glad to be with all of you. I know we have a very global audience. There are people in Europe, there are people in Asia, there are people in Australia, there are people in Africa. So there you go, right? We got people in California, we got people here on the East Coast of the United States where I'm at. So by all means, we just do it our way. I answer your questions. You will get an answer to your question if you send me a super chat. It may not be the answer that you want. It may not be the answer that you want, but you will get an answer. It may not be the answer you want, but it will be an answer. So that's how we work. So yeah, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Keep the super chats rolling in, and I will write them down. And I guess we will get started with our opening remarks after I take a drink of water. There we go. All right, folks. Probably the most important news item is the situation in Cuba right now, where the U.S. government is doing its best to foment unrest, to destabilize the country. And that should really be the priority of everyone who is a revolutionary and a Marxist and an anti-imperialist, because Cuba has been dedicated to standing with oppressed people around the world since the moment it had its revolution. Cuba, they supported the black liberation struggle in the United States. There was Robert F. Williams, the leader of the NAACP of North Carolina. He got into a shootout with the Ku Klux Klan, fled for his life, and where did he go? He went to Cuba, and he did Radio Free Dixie, broadcasting revolutionary black liberation politics from Cuba. Assata Shakur, a leader of the Black Liberation Army, a relative of the rapper Tupac Shakur. She was falsely charged with a crime. She broke out of jail, and where did she go? She went to Cuba. Assata Shakur is in Cuba. Cuba has sent its soldiers to Angola to defend Angola, an African country, when it was invaded by the apartheid government of South Africa. Cuba has stood in solidarity with Palestine. Cuba has stood in solidarity with people all over the world that are fighting against imperialism. Cuba was a good friend of the Irish National Liberation Movement. Cuba has been a good friend of people all over the world fighting for their liberation. Fidel Castro was a very good friend of Nelson Mandela and the ANC. The U.S. government called the African National Congress terrorists, but Cuba was on the side of the African people. Cuba has been a stronghold of liberation and anti-imperialism, and that is why the imperialists are targeting it with one of their destabilization campaigns. Cuba has paved the way on all kinds of issues of social justice, including LGBT rights. Let's remember, right, that Cuba has worked very, very hard to have an LGBT-friendly society. They've had billboard campaigns. They provide transsexual surgery, is freely provided to any citizen who feels they want to undergo transsexual operations. They have worked very hard to promote LGBT rights and to correct some of the mistakes that were made in the early years of their revolution. The Cuban people and the Cuban Revolution has had very good economic results for the population. A great source on Cuba and its successes is the CIA World Factbook. If you compare the life expectancy of the Cubans to the life expectancy of the people in Mexico, or the life expectancy of the people in Guatemala, or the life expectancy of the people in Haiti, or the Dominican Republic, or Jamaica, or any of the surrounding countries, I don't even know what that means, LK. I do not know what that means. But yes, Cuba has created a life expectancy that is significantly higher. It has a lower infant mortality rate. It has wiped out illiteracy. And in fact, Cuban literacy volunteers and Cuban medical volunteers travel all over the world, to provide aid to people who are struggling. African countries, Asian countries, Cuba is known all over the world for the work that it has done. The achievements of the Cuban Revolution are massive. They are massive. They are quite massive. And right now, the United States is trying to foment political unrest in the country, taking advantage of the fact that the country has suffered a slowdown in tourism because of the pandemic, taking advantage of the fact that the country has suffered, right? Thoughts on public servants and civil service. Global Affairs Canada. Okay, all right. Civil service. Public service. Global Affairs Canada. That Cuba, you want to talk about what they've achieved, in terms of their population, in terms of industrializing the island, raising up living standards. I mean, the Cuban Revolution has had massive achievements. And right now, there's been a slowdown in tourism because of the pandemic. Cuba is cut off from necessary, needed medical supplies due to the blockade. There are shortages in the country, and because of that, there is unrest. And the president has met with some of the protesters, and there's a real desire on the part of the Cuban government to resolve the tensions in the country. And people have been piling into the streets not to protest the Cuban government, but to support the Cuban government. There have been massive demonstrations in support of the Communist Party, in support of the president, in support of the Cuban socialist system. Of course, you're not hearing anything about those protests on TV, but now is the time. Now is the time for solidarity with Cuba to be a priority, to make clear that we will not allow the imperialists to overturn the Cuban Revolution. So I want to make sure that everyone watching this is doing everything they can to spread the truth about Cuba, because these anti-Cuba activists, these right-wing Miami extremists, are dirty, rotten liars. I don't know how to put it any nicer than that. I have been told by so many of them that the blockade doesn't do anything. No, the blockade does quite a bit. The blockade of Cuba, it's not simply a blockade of American companies doing business with Cuba. America doesn't do business with any company that does business with Cuba. If you have sugar, if you're exporting cupcakes to the United States, you must sign a document that there is not an ounce of Cuban sugar in those cupcakes, and you must sign a document that you will never sell those cupcakes to Cuba. And if you're found to somehow be lying on those documents, then you can lose your ability to sell anything in the United States. You go to Cuba, they can't get auto parts they need. When I went to the World Festival of Youth and Students in 2013, there was a young man who was in a wheelchair. He was in a wheelchair because of the fact that the medicine that he needed, and the medical, surgical tools needed that would give him the ability to walk were blocked because of the blockade. The economic embargo has been condemned by the United Nations over and over and over again. It's a unilateral action. It's a violation of international law. The United States has just waged an all-out war, but these anti-Cuba hacks, these gusanos, these, Miami Cuban exiles say, oh, the blockade doesn't do anything. The only reason the people there don't have food is because the Cuban government takes all of it. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. These Miami Cuban hacks, they're claiming that Venezuela has sent its military in and it's murdering people on the streets. Not true. They are just liars, and they lie, and they lie, and they lie. And for a long time, one of the biggest heroes of the Miami Cuban exile community was Luis Posada Carriles. Luis Posada Carriles. Google it. Google this. You don't believe me? You say, oh, Caleb, this can't be true. Google it. Luis Posada Carriles was a leader of the Miami Cuban exile community. This was a guy who bombed an airplane and killed 73 civilians. He blew up a civilian airline. This guy was a terrorist and a murderer, Luis Posada Carriles. And he bombed an airline and killed innocent civilians. But the U.S. government harbored him and protected him. And he was treated as a hero by the people that march through the streets of the United States now saying, oh, we support Cuba. They don't support Cuba. They support the economic blockade. They support Luis Posada Carriles. He also bombed hotels, bombed restaurants. He was a murderer. But they liked him. Why? Because he's against communism. And that's what you have to remember. The Cuban exile community, very much tied in with the mafia and organized crime, very much tied in with terrorism and bombings and assassinations. These are not freedom fighters. These are not people who want democracy. And in fact, a lot of the people who stormed the Capitol for Donald Trump were part of this group, right? The Miami Cuban exiles, right? Those folks piled in big numbers, bust into, the Capitol to support Donald Trump at his Stop the Steal rally. So don't be fooled for a minute. Do not be fooled for a minute. For one single minute, do not be fooled. Do not be fooled by the anti-Cuba protesters that are taking to the streets right now. Don't be fooled by them, right? There are problems in the country, I'm sure, that need to be resolved. The Communist Party needs to work at improving its relationship and improving its economy. But don't think that the State Department protests, people have been protesting for months in Colombia, nothing in U.S. media. People have been protesting for months in Argentina and Chile, nothing in U.S. media. People have been protesting for months in Haiti, and nothing was said in American media until the president got killed, and they had to catch us all up on the situation and say, oh boy, you're right. People have been protesting in Haiti for a long time because the president, it's unconstitutional, and they just caught us up on it. But, these protests hadn't started for 10 minutes, and they were all over CNN. They were all over CNN, and that shows that this is not a people's movement from below. 224 presidential dream candidate, right? And markets create state create markets. All right, good question. So yes, don't fall for this. And don't let your friends and family fall for this, right? Don't let your friends and family fall for this. And call out these folks for what they are. The same people screaming about Cuba right now support the economic blockade. They support terrorist groups like Luis Posada Carriles. This is not coming from a good place. These protests are not coming from a good place. Hands off Cuba needs to be the demand. U.S. out. Let the Cuban people resolve their own problems. Let them reform their own political system to make it more efficient. Hands off Cuba. That needs to be the unified message. And we need to expose the Miami crowd. A lot of progressive folks are taken in by this. Let these people know, if you support these protests that are taking place, if you support SOS Cuba, you are supporting Donald Trump's Stop the Steal mob, because that's a big part of it. You support these protests. You are supporting everything that went on January 6th, right? I mean, if you support these protests that are taking place, you are supporting people who support the blockade of Cuba or trying to block food from reaching their own people. So there you go. There you go, folks. That is what you need to know. Now, as far as that, we need to do everything we can to raise awareness about Cuba. I was asked by a good friend of mine, who is interested in learning about Cuba, to provide a list of books through which people can learn about the Cuban Revolution. So I am going to list those books here for all of you, because I'm sure there's probably a lot of you right now who want to catch up on Cuba and learn about Cuba and the revolution and its economic results. So I will start listing off books for you. Book number one I would recommend is The Economic Transformation of Cuba by Edward Borstein. Edward Borstein, published by Monthly Review Press, that describes in detail how Cuba transitioned to becoming a socialist society. The Economic Transition of Cuba. That's the first book I would recommend. The second book I would recommend is Children of the Revolution by Jonathan Kozol. Jonathan Kozol wrote a very good book, Children of the Revolution, about the Cuban educational system. Jonathan Kozol is the most respected scholar when it comes to education in the United States. He wrote The Shame of a Nation. He's just a widely respected educational theorist, and he wrote a book in praise of the socialist system of Cuba. He lived in Cuba for a while. I would recommend you go and read Children of the Revolution by Jonathan Kozol. Other book I would recommend, Cuba and the USA, A New World Order by Harry Targ. Very good book that talks about Cuba and the economy in the 1990s. Cuba Looks to the Year 2000 by Mark Frank. I think Mark Frank wrote Cuba Looks to the Year 2000, a very good book. It talks about the Cuban hip-hop movement. It's very good stuff. I would recommend that book. And there are some other books out there on the Cuban Revolution that I would recommend. But there you go. So those are books that, come to mind off the top of my head. But yes, if you want to learn about the results of the Cuban Revolution, I would check out those books. I would also recommend Fidel Castro's own writings. Whether it's, there's kind of an autobiographical interview series he did called My Life. That's very, very good. Very, very good. I would also recommend, and we're having a thunderstorm here, so if we get cut off, we get cut off. There's nothing I can do about it, but I'm going to keep going here. I mean, you can all see me. I can see you. I'm talking, so whatever. I would recommend that. Those books, I would recommend Che Guevara's writings. Che Guevara Speaks to Young People is a very good book, full of speeches by Che Guevara that are very powerful. I would recommend Fidel Castro, and his speeches, about, Cuba and... I would recommend any compilation of Fidel Castro's writings and speeches. That's all good stuff as well. There's a lot that's been published about Cuba that's very, very good. So that's what I would recommend. If you want to educate yourself about Cuba, now is a good time to do it. Again, we need to push back against the media barrage of deception that is coming down right now. They're trying to set the stage for basically what happened in Libya and what happened in Syria and what's happened in other countries to happen in Cuba. And the Cuban people aren't going to stand for it. And they might be able to foment some kind of civil war. We don't want that. We don't want that. What good would come out of that? What good would come out of that, right? These people say they support the Cuban people. Have the Syrian people benefited from the results of the USA fomenting civil war? Have the Libyan people benefited from the destabilization? When the Soviet Union fell, did life get better for the people across Eastern Europe? Did things improve? No. And in fact, life expectancy dropped, living conditions went down. All across the Eastern Bloc, people overwhelmingly say life was better. Don't fall for this. Does Cuba need reform to update its system, to move toward having more of a market sector and such? Sure. Does Cuba need to reform the way the Communist Party works? Sure. But does Cuba need to have destabilization? No. Does Cuba need to have regime change? No. Does Cuba need to have the restoration of capitalism? No. No. Look at Haiti. Look at the Dominican Republic. Look at Jamaica. Look at Guatemala. Look at Honduras. If it weren't for the Communist Party, that's what Cuba would look like. The achievements of the Cuban Revolution for the population are massive. There are massive achievements for the population that have been achieved. People all over the world look to Cuba and look at their economic achievements. I mean, it's very hard to deny what the Cuban Communist Party has achieved for the population. So don't let the scourge of neoliberalism penetrate the Cuban island. Don't do it. Don't do it. And again, I may be a broken record. This may be the same thing I've said in a lot of interviews recently, and this may be the same thing you heard me say on Sputnik Radio yesterday. This may be the same thing you heard me say to Jackson Hinkle when I interviewed him. But it's gosh darn important. It's gosh darn important because in the 1990s, when the Soviet Union fell, it was Cuba that reoriented the communist parties of Latin America, in Venezuela and Bolivia and Nicaragua and elsewhere to build popular front coalitions against neoliberalism. That was the communist parties. They figured that out. It was with Cuban guidance. Cuba really coordinated the global struggle against neoliberalism. They were talking about neoliberalism in Cuba long before Noam Chomsky was talking about it, long before Amy Goodman was talking about it, long before it was being discussed by liberal voices and academics. FMLN, El Salvador. It was being discussed there, a long time, and the global struggle against neoliberalism was very much coordinated by the Cuban Revolution. They had very, very big achievements, and Cuba has benefited the American working class. If it wasn't for Cuba and the support they gave to the Black freedom struggle, who knows what the conditions in the United States might be like. If it wasn't for Cuba and the support they've given to the labor movement, they have the Cuba-U.S. labor exchange. U.S. labor union leaders go to Cuba and learn from the Cubans about workplace organizing methods and learn from Latin American revolutionary forces. Cuba has been a friend of all progressive people in the United States, overwhelmingly, right? If you're someone in the United States who believes in the rights of women or believes in the rights of LGBT people or believes in the Black liberation struggle, the Cubans have been on your side. So we need to just beat this drum over and over and over again, and not let the media try to change the picture. So there you go. There you go. Now, another thing I want to just quickly let people be aware of. We're not ready to give you a full announcement, but I want to give a shout out. I think some of them are watching right now, but this is not really a shout out for them. It's a shout out for everybody else who doesn't know them. There's a very important group of people in New York City right now called the John Brown Volunteers. And I am so proud of the John Brown Volunteers. They are really, really amazing. They are really, really amazing. Amazing folks. And they're a group of young people from around the country. Some of them are from Georgia. Some of them are from Illinois. Some of them are from Pennsylvania. Some of them are local here in New York. And they have come to New York City, but they're going to be dispatched around the country pretty soon. And they are a street outreach team building socialist and progressive politics, promoting the Center for Political Innovation. They're called the John Brown Volunteers. More information will be coming about them soon. But they are committed. I mean, they are out in the street every day, going to people, getting a progressive message out there. They have buttons that they're distributing that say, "End the wars, bring the troops home." They have another button that has student debt crossed out. They have been, they're distributing palm cards to promote CPIUSA.org, Center for Political Innovation, CPIUSA. They've been out there with these glossy palm cards to promote the Center for Political Innovation, and they're ready to hit the ground running. Right now they're in New York, and they are, but pretty soon, give it time. As things get going here, I'm pretty sure they'll be in Chicago pretty soon. They'll probably be in Atlanta pretty soon. They'll probably be in different parts of the country. They went to a Cuba demonstration. There was a demonstration on Thursday to support Cuba, and they went and they sold Gaddafi's Green Book, right? They sold the Green Book, and they sold Gaddafi's Green Book to all the people at this Cuba demonstration in Union Square, and people were scooping it up, by the dozens. They've been collecting emails and names. They are ready to build the Center for Political Innovation, right? And not all of us are in the position to do what these folks are doing. I'm not, right? I've got a full-time job. I'm a reporter, right? But these kids, they're in the prime of their life. They're not married. They don't have any kids, and they're ready to spend their days building socialism, and they're ready to go out and be full-time organizers. This is what you're supposed to do when you're young, right? They see this as a commitment. And I'm so proud of them because they're not giving up. It is not easy. It is very, very hard to learn to do street outreach, right? And to just go up to person after person after person, to deal with people that are hostile, to deal with people that might not be so friendly. But they're relentless. They are relentless. I mean, they just keep going. They just keep going. And we got other people around the country who are ready to join the John Brown Volunteers. So I am just blown away by this outreach team that has come together here in New York City. You're going to be hearing more from them pretty soon. They're going to pretty soon. They're going to have their own, their own videos on YouTube. They'll be making their own social media content. There's going to be a GoFundMe for folks who want to support them. But this outreach team is the beginning of something, right? Because CPI, the Center for Political Innovation, for a while, it was just kind of an idea. It was something that was in our heads. It was, some web conference. There was a web conference that happened once a month. Well, now we have had an in-person meetup in Pennsylvania, an amazing weekend that was just amazing with 36 people and singing and speeches. There's a manual, an educational manual. And there's another meetup that's going to happen in California. And I mean, it's happening. I mean, this now we have the John Brown volunteers that are hitting the streets every day. This is happening. Like the Center for Political Innovation has gone from just being a vague idea that we have in our heads. It's becoming a real thing. It's becoming a real think tank that is spreading socialist education throughout the United States. All right, Jimmy Carter. It's happening. And I am so proud of these kids because they are relentless. They are relentless. And they're not just hitting the streets every day, they're studying every day. They have the CPI manual, the Center for Political Innovation Educational Manual, We Are City Builders. Every day they do a study session. Every day, at least an hour of their day is spent studying the CPI educational manual and studying Marx and Lenin and Mao and William Z. Foster and learning from the manual. Every day they get together, they sit in a Wendy's or a McDonald's and they study the manual. It's just beautiful. It's just beautiful. And they're committed to it. They are committed to it, and it's happening. And they're getting better at it. They're making, contacts and names, and they're doing it, right? They're doing it. And I am just so amazingly proud of them for what they're doing. And I'm so proud to see how relentless they are, and we need more of them. If you're in this situation, if you don't have a lot going on, right? If you're just kind of, if you're in the prime of your life and, maybe you ought to become a John Brown volunteer. Maybe you ought to send me a message and see if we can plug you into the work that you're doing. But if you're somebody who, you got a wife and kids, or you got a job, or you can't do it, well, then maybe you can give a donation to help them do what they can do, right? And maybe you can talk to me about a donation to help them do the work that they are doing, because they are doing it, right? All kinds of random people in New York City, on the subways, in the parks, have been walked up to with somebody who talked to them and said, have you ever heard of the Center for Political Innovation? And gave them a palm card that said, we are city builders. We need a government of action to fight for working families. It's happening. Like, people are suddenly becoming very, very aware of the Center for Political Innovation and our anti-imperialist, constructive suit socialism. These kids are doing it. They're doing it, and they're ready to take this on the road. They're studying together. And it's amazing. It's really, really amazing. So again, like I said, if you want to be part of it, by all means, send me a message. And if you want to give a donation, by all means, send me a message, and I'll talk to you about giving a donation, because we're ready to do it. And you'll be hearing more from the kids as it goes on. I can't, I'm just telling you what I've been observing. It's why I haven't been as live as much as I should have been. I like to do these streams more often, but I've been working with them. And it's difficult. It's difficult to get it going. The logistics, it's been a little stressful with people coming in from out of town and this, and making sure they have what they need. They have all the buttons. They have all the palm card. But it's happening. It's happening. And it's taking on a life of its own. And I am so happy about it. So, if you want to get involved, or if you want to help out, by all means, let me know. And they've been, taking out a pro-Cuba message. They've been selling Gaddafi's Green Book at the demonstration supporting Cuba, a very, very important document about socialism in Africa. So there you go, folks. There you go. I just wanted to let you know about that. In other news, Jen Psaki has admitted that Facebook censorship and federal agencies seem to go hand in hand. Now, the comments she made were in the context of "quote unquote" misinformation about vaccines, etc. That's worth noting, right? That Jen Psaki, talked about how Facebook posts are being flagged by federal agencies, and that the U.S. deep state, the FBI, and the executive branch of the government is coordinating with the social media giants about what gets censored. Well, many of us knew that already. That shouldn't be a big shock to any of us. But for some people, that might be a big surprise. So that's certainly disturbing. We also saw, the White House. And thank you very much for supporting our work. The White House claimed that communism is a failed ideology. Did you see this? Not only did White House spokesperson Jen Psaki say that communism is a failed ideology, but furthermore, Joe Biden himself said it. He said communism is a failed ideology and socialism is not a good substitute. But here's the crazy thing. If communism is a failed ideology, who defeated the Nazis? If communism is a failed ideology, how did Yuri Gagarin get into space? If communism is a failed ideology, why have 800 million people in China been lifted out of poverty? If communism is a failed ideology, why did it wipe out illiteracy in the Soviet Union? Why did it electrify the Soviet Union and raise millions of people into poverty? Why did it industrialize, like all of Eurasia? Communism is a failed ideology. Why do people from all over the planet marvel at the achievements of Cuba's healthcare system? If communism is a failed ideology, why is it that all over the planet people studied Mao's Red Book and were screaming in support of Mao Zedong and the Chinese Communist Party? If communism is a failed ideology, why is the AK-47 rifle considered one of the most important guns and most widely used, most efficient weapons ever invented in history? If communism is a failed ideology, why did it invent LED lights? If communism is a failed ideology, why did the capitalist bosses in the Western world have to create things like a welfare state and recognize labor unions and such, and out of fear of revolution? Communism has been very, very, very successful historically. I'm sorry, Russia and China, before communism, dirt poor countries. After communism, economic superpowers. Cuba, before communism, deeply poor country. With communism, economic superpower. I mean, raising people out of poverty, healthcare everywhere. Great achievements with communism. Compare Nicaragua, where the Sandinistas are in power, with Honduras, with Guatemala. Honduras and Guatemala have U.S.-backed authoritarian regimes. Nicaragua has a socialist government. The people of Nicaragua live far better. You can go down the line, the achievements. Look at Vietnam, right? Again, before communism, how did the people of Vietnam live? And look at the people of Vietnam today, and the achievements they've had in raising living standards, economic expansion, all of that with a centrally planned economy. Meanwhile, country after country after country in the developing world has free market capitalism. Haiti is a great example of what capitalism has to offer. Nigeria is the top oil-producing country on the African continent, but the people of Nigeria are poor, they're illiterate, they're hungry, and the reason for that is because their oil that they export is not under their control. It's under the control of BP, Chevron, and ExxonMobil and Shell Oil, right? You go all across the developing world. You have countries that are rich with natural resources, with minerals, with oil, but people that are poor. And why is that? It's because of Western imperialism. It's because of capitalism. But when countries break free, countries like Iran, countries like Venezuela, countries like China and Russia, countries like Syria, when they break free and they begin a road of independent economic development, seizing control of their natural resources, seizing control of their economy, and organizing it to serve public good and not the profits of a few, when that happens, countries have great achievements. They industrialize. They raise people out of poverty. It was socialism that electrified Egypt and built the Aswan Dam and the Aswan hydroelectrical power plant. Under socialism in Libya had the highest life expectancy on the African continent. It had, the best economy. People from all over Africa were trying to get into Libya to get some of the benefits of the oil-rich socialist state created by Gaddafi and Islamic socialism. But now that Libya has been forced to rejoin the global Western capitalist system at the barrel of a gun, at the cruise missiles bombed and destroyed the country, now people are trying to get out. Now there's modern day, slave markets in Libya. Libya has just been destroyed. So don't let anyone tell you this. What Joe Biden is saying, this, communism is a failed ideology, that's malarkey. That's just a bunch of malarkey. I mean, that's just not accurate. And you can say it over and over and over again if you want, but it doesn't make it true. Doesn't make it true. You can say it over and over again, it doesn't make it true. I will quote Joseph Stalin. Joseph Stalin said that paper is an amazing substance. It's an amazing substance because it can withstand having even the greatest and most blatant falsehoods written upon it. Well, I would argue that social media is a very, very, very powerful platform because it can withstand having even the biggest lies told upon it. And I'm sorry, but the success of socialism, raising millions from poverty, industrializing countries, wiping out illiteracy, electrifying countries, inventing space travel, defeating fascism, inventing things like LED lights, like the video game Tetris, like space travel. It's massive. And thank you very much. Justin Simons says, special thanks to the John Brown volunteers and all the work they do. The work and studies being done at the Center for Political Innovation are so important. Thank you for reaching out to the public and engaging on a real material level, says Justin Simons. Well, thank you, Justin Simons, for all the work that you have done, because Justin Simons just gave an amazing contribution, but Justin Simons is a hard-working, dedicated person who has done a lot to build the Center for Political Innovation himself. His hard work is deserving of appreciation. There are so many people who have worked so hard. I wish I could thank them all personally, but if I did that, I would forget one or two people, and then they would not get the appraise. So many people have heard our message. They've heard that we need a government of action that will fight for working families. They've heard that we need to get out of the movement and get to the masses. They've heard all of this, and they've said, this is the message that I want to hear. They've said, this is what I'm about. This is what I'm about. And because of that, we've put it up the flagpole, and all kinds of people have saluted. Right? We gave the trumpet sound, and people all over the planet, saluted in reply. People are ready for what we have to offer. The Center for Political Innovation, the city-building tendency is on the march. We are on the march. We are marching ahead. CPIUSA.org, Center for Political Innovation. Out of the movement into the masses. We need a government of action to fight for working families. This movement is moving ahead, folks. We are moving ahead. We are doing it. I have never seen anything like this. I've never been involved in anything like this. The level of energy, the level of passion and dedication, the level of studiousness and real desire to learn about socialism while spreading awareness, service, study, and struggle, what's going on with the students and youth for a New America clubs. This is exciting. We are on fire. We are marching ahead, and it is a fire that it's going to take a lot to put out. It's going to take a lot to put out the fire that's burning right now. On that note, folks, that'll end my opening remarks for tonight. Now I'll call you out as I see you. Names and locations. I will call you out as I see you, and then I'll answer your super chats. And that'll be our stream for tonight. So names and locations. Arturo in Alaska is with us. Very good. Very, very good. Who else is with us tonight? Arturo in Alaska is with us. Nadia in East Harlem is with us. Josh in Nebraska. Paul in California. Nashville, Tennessee, wandering left. Itzel in Las Vegas. Jeff in Los Angeles, Cincinnati, Ohio, Jenny Lynn, JT24 in Mississippi, Springfield, Missouri, Tamara and Caroline from Tamara, Carolyn, and Dario from Brooklyn. Welcome. Brothers House in College Park, Maryland, says Chaya. Robert from Hawaii, good friend of the program. Vic in Kentucky, Auckland, New Zealand. Stephen Clearly, Northern California. Ryan in Oakland, Terre Haute. Jeff in Grand Canyon, Arizona. Dan from Quebec. Boise, Idaho, Bendigo, Australia, Cameron from Connecticut, Santa Clarita, Orange Duke, Karen from Columbus, Ohio, Tony from Tasmania, Clydebank, Kieran from San Diego, Matt from San Antonio, John Witt in Houston, Texas, Adelaide, Australia, Vinicius from Brazil, Dublin, Ireland, Wisconsin, Joshua Tree, California, where it's super hot, says Kinky, good friend of the program. Danny from Illinois, very good. Calgary, Canada. Justin Simons is in SoCal. SoCal, so red. Southern California. Ramsey is in Cincinnati. Very good. Green Bay, Wisconsin. Allende, Mexico. Pomona, California. Brian Schaefer in Illinois. Lockport, New York, Southern California. Tristan in Maryland, parasocialite, good friend of the program. Quebec City, glad to be back. Atlanta. Stephen in Seattle, Los Angeles. Future, Williams County, North Carolina. Dust James, check out Dust James' channel. He's doing great stuff. So does Parasocialite, by the way. Check out both of their channels. They do great stuff on social media. Miami, Florida. Houston, Texas. Marin, California. Brazos Valley, Chicago, United Corporations of America, Tennessee, Mexico City, Dallas, Texas, next door, Mo in Toronto, Denver, Colorado, Taronga, New Zealand. Oh, you like my shirt? It's not new. I've had this shirt for a couple years now. Oh, Solidarity said in San Diego. Very good, very good. All right, Mohsin from Iran, Cleveland Pirate Alex, Kingston, London, Vancouver Nick, Fort Worth, Texas, Jeremy in Ashe County, North Carolina, Dam International, says Ramsey. All right, I don't know where Dam International is. No, so there you go. All right, folks, hit the like button. Rhode Island, Frank, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, hit the notifications bell. Red Illuminati is on, and he's got a great channel as well. Just made a great video on Cuba. Check out his channel. There's so many great channels out there. Jenny Lynn is with us, good friend of the program. Lafayette, Alex Gunn. So many great channels, folks. So many people doing great work. We got to work together. We got to pull together. We are up against it, right? I mean, I just wrote this book, BreadTube Serves Imperialism, right? They're all out to stifle our message. Queensland, Australia, again, Glendale, California. We got to be together in this. We got to be together in this. So now I'm going to start answering the Super Chat questions. Keep the Super Chats rolling in. I will keep answering your questions until they are done. First Super Chat question, Civil Service, Public Service, and Global Affairs Canada. I do not know what Global Affairs Canada is. I am not up on my Canadian politics, so my Canadian friends will have to forgive me. That's just not something I'm up on. I do know about civil service and public service, right? Governments have employees, and those are generally referred to as civil servants or public employees. And that the first civil service examination was actually created in China. It was in China that you had the first civil service exam. Great work, comrades. Keep going. Solidarity from Australia. David Fox, good friend of the program. Thank you very much for your super chat. Much appreciated. Civil service, public service, global affairs, Canada. The first civil service examination was in China. And public servants. In fact, I think the majority of people in the United States that are members of labor unions are public servants, people that are public employees, because in the private sector, unions have just been, reduced very drastically. But yeah, I don't know about Global Affairs Canada, so I can't really answer that question, but there you go. What would be my dream 2024 presidential candidate? Imagine somebody who talked like Huey Long, but had an anti-imperialist perspective, was anti-racist, right? somebody who talked about, how we needed to fight for working families, someone who had kind of a working class toughness, but was anti-war, anti-imperialist, and populist for the working class. Someone who said we need a government of action to fight for working families. That would be the ideal candidate. I'm so glad to be out again and able to enjoy Main Street and go to the tavern now that I'm vaccinated. Hope you're enjoying your summer. Well, thank you, Jared. Thank you very much. I've been vaccinated. I'm not anti-vax here. I am not anti-vax here. There you go. There you go. So thank you, Jared, for that. But yeah, my ideal 2024 presidential candidate would be a candidate who wanted a constructive socialism, a candidate who wanted to end the wars, a candidate who wanted to dismantle imperialism, a candidate who said we need a government of action to fight for working families, a candidate who agreed with the 4-point platform, the economic support of the United States, a candidate who supported building Fusion City as an alternative to fossil fuels, as a way to rescue the planet from climate change, a candidate who said the solution to the crisis on the border was the Sandino-Zapata economic corridor and massive economic development of that region. That would be a candidate that I would like. So there you go. Next question. Did markets create the state, or did the state create the markets? Neither. The state originated with the origin of private property. Authoritarian tendencies are not unique to the left or right ideologies, but why has it been weaponized against and equated with Marxism? That's a good question. Authoritarianism. That's a very good question. Okay, so the origin of the state came with the origin of private property, right? Originally, human beings were hunter-gatherers. They lived in tribes of 20 to 30 people. They went around gathering fruits and nuts and plants to eat. They went around hunting animals and eating them. And within those tribes, there may have been some kind of hierarchy. There may have been some kind of leadership, but there were no classes. No one was exploiting anybody else. Everybody in the tribe was pretty much equal. If you were the one who killed the animal, you might get the best cut of the meat. Priority was sometimes given to older folks. I believe there was kind of worship of women. In some cases they call it matriarchy, in the sense that women were held in high regard because they could get pregnant and have children. But for the most part, it was a pretty egalitarian existence, even though it was based on extreme scarcity. The human life expectancy was very low. But then we got too good at hunting and gathering. We figured out how to make spears and throw rocks and kill animals effectively. We figured out the patterns and how plants were growing, and we got so good at hunting and gathering that there was a mass scarcity. So out of that first mass scarcity, that first ecological crisis, right, where there was a shortage, where we were taking too much from Mother Earth, what did we do? We changed the way we interacted with nature, and we domesticated animals, and we started growing crops. And with the growing of crops came the private ownership of land. And the private ownership of land gave birth to the family, private property, and the state. Frederick Engels actually wrote a book, The Origin of the Family, Private Property, and the State. And he talked about how once some people own land, and then it becomes necessary to have this thing called a state that makes sure that somebody else doesn't take somebody else's land, right? The state enforces private property. And furthermore, you need this thing called the family, because you have to determine who gets the land when somebody dies, right? And also, furthermore, some people own land and some people don't own land. And so you have to have this mechanism by the state to make the people who own the land, keep their control over the people who work for them. And it was with the origin of slavery. Slavery was the first major mode of production, right? The slavery replaced hunter-gatherer tribal civilization. And that, the origin of the state came with the origin of private property. Now, markets did not develop until later. You didn't have a market until you had products being sold. You didn't start to see a market until you started to see the rise of the city-states, in Greece, in Mesopotamia, in Tunisia, in Carthage. that's where you started to see markets. Markets were when you had the origin of the cities and you had people selling their products, right? Originally, the private ownership of land led to subsistence farming. People grew in order to eat off of it and to survive. But it was when you started to have the creation of products to be sold that you had markets. So the state long predates the market, right? The state was created to protect private property. And what is the state? This is a very important question. It's very obscure. People think the state means the government. People think the state means authority. The state is a body of armed men who have a legitimacy of armed force, right? If I went and killed somebody right now, that would be called murder, and I would go to jail. If you went and killed somebody right now, that would be called murder, and you would go to jail. However, the state, if the state were to sentence me to death and then inject me with a lethal injection, that would not be murder. Why? Because the state has a monopoly on legitimate armed force. The state is allowed to use violence. Nobody else is. That is what defines the state. The state is a body of armed men. It's police. It's soldiers. Synthetic meat in answer to climate disaster. Okay. All right, I'm writing it down. Synthetic meat. Solve climate disaster. The state is the police forces, it's the intelligence agencies, it's the military. It is a body of armed force with the legitimacy, they're allowed to be violent, you're not. It's a group of armed men who are allowed to be violent, and you ain't, and that is the state. And the state was created for the purpose of maintaining the power of the ruling class, right? Under, the slave system, it was the owners of the land and the slave owners. They were the ones who had the state, and they had an army to enforce their rule. Under feudalism, it was the landlords and the nobility and the kings and the aristocrats. They're the ones that had the state. Under our system, it's the capitalists who have the state. It's the owners of private property, the billionaires, the bankers, the owners of big corporations, hotels, the owners of big box stores and oil companies, and that's those who own, have I read The Stalin School of Falsification? Yes, I have, and we can talk about that. Falsification by Trotsky. So that is the basis of the state, and the state exists to protect the ruling class, and that's the origin of the state. And the elimination of the state is the elimination of classes. When classes can be eliminated, eventually the state is eliminated. When there is a vast material abundance, then the need for the state gradually withers away, and that is the Marxist theory. Next question, what do I think of the FMLN in El Salvador? I tend to have a very positive assessment of leftist forces in Latin America. I understand, though, the FMLN, in more recent years, there's been a lot of frustration and disappointment. They haven't achieved what the Sandinistas have achieved in Nicaragua and what the Venezuelans have achieved in Bolivarianism and what, Bolivia has achieved, that there's been some real shortcomings and corruption in El Salvador in recent years, and that's what gave rise to some of the right-wing forces there that have gained power. But I still, overwhelmingly, they have a history of being, fighters for the poor and for the peasantry, of anti-imperialists, and I have a positive view of them overwhelmingly, but I think there's been some disappointment with them recently, and that may be part of their setbacks. And look, leftist and revolutionary forces can often make mistakes, right? And those mistakes can contribute to their defeat, but that means that they have the ability to assess their mistakes and sum them up and make corrections. I think one of the reasons the Soviet Union fell is because the process through which the Communist Party of the Soviet Union was able to assess its achievements, its successes, its failures, its mistakes, learn what they did right and learn what they did wrong, the mechanism through which they were able to make those determinations was broken, largely. In the Soviet Union, there was not broad discussion through which the population could surmise how effective they were building socialism. And because that was broken, the Soviet Union wasn't able to achieve it. And I also would maintain a lot of the communist groups in the United States, part of the reason they're so ineffective is because their inability to calculate success and failure. They're not able to accurately measure success and failure. they exist in a kind of neurotic loop where they've been doing the exact same thing over and over and over again, and expecting different results. And they're unable to say, this worked, this didn't work, this worked, and I saw this for years. I was in a communist group that was incapable of measuring success and failure. In their minds, they would just keep doing what they've always done, and they kept getting smaller and weaker, and they kept getting smaller and weaker. No, they just kept doing what they were. I mean, it was like they couldn't possibly bring themselves, they were just getting weaker and weaker and weaker and less effective and less effective and less effective. And every time they would reform themselves, it would be a reform that would make them weaker. And that's a lot of far left groups, a lot of groups that are, kind of disconnected from the mainstream of society. They get into kind of a neurotic loop like that, where they're not really growing, and they can't really assess success and failure. But that's not the case with the FMLN. That's not the case with the Bolivarians. That's not the case with the real communist parties in the world. They're able to accept, look, after the fall of the Soviet Union, Cuba was able to reorient the communists of Latin America to have great successes in places like Bolivia and Venezuela, Nicaragua, Ecuador, and other places. Because they said, okay, we've been doing this tactic, but it didn't work. We're going to switch. We're going to do another tactic. If you look at every great revolution in history, it comes with a tactical shift. There's a dramatic tactical shift that precedes the revolution. Lenin building the party of new type. Mao going into the countryside, right? The Bolivarian, the left of Latin America, getting out of the countryside, giving up on this rural people's war stuff, and building a popular front against neoliberalism. That successful revolutions are generally preceded, about 10 years before them, maybe 20 years before them, you have a dramatic tactical reorientation. And that is what really makes revolutions happen. Revolutions, people have this illusion that we're just going to keep doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over, and we'll get something else. You don't hear about the Zapatistas anymore. All right, we'll talk about that. That's not how it works. And in fact, Lenin very famously said that if the situation changes in 24 hours, the tactics must also change in 24 hours. And when Lenin came back from exile, right, he brought the April thesis, and he completely reoriented the Bolsheviks to their tactic to move toward taking power, right? And that a serious revolutionary organization is constantly reorienting its tactics. So there you go. Will Morena become a socialist party? Well, Morena, it's a coalition, right? I mean, Morena is in coalition with the PT, which is a communist party in Mexico. There's a lot of socialists and Marxists that are in the coalition that support Morena. Morena is a popular front. It's an anti-neoliberal, kind of social democratic, but kind of pretty anti-imperialist coalition. Mexico recognizes, Maduro. They didn't recognize the election results for a long time. They were very suspicious of the U.S. election results. AMLO, Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. I mean, he has got an anti-imperialist streak to him, and his coalition has a lot of genuine revolutionaries and Marxists. His victory was very much a defeat for U.S. imperialism, but, it's not, Mexico is still a capitalist country. They have not changed property relations. They're not moving towards socialism. So it's a complicated situation there. But I have a positive view of Morena, pretty overwhelmingly positive view of them. But again, it's not socialism. It's a popular front government. And what generally tends to happen when you have a popular front government is they face it, as things escalate in the country, they have to go one way or the other. And that's what happened in Brazil, mind you, right? Lula da Silva, who was followed by Dilma Rousseff. Again, it was not an anti-imperialist. They never went to socialism, but they were kind of progressive, and they were kind of anti-imperialist, and they needed to go all the way to socialism, and they didn't. And because they didn't veer towards socialism like Venezuela, the right was able to defeat them, and that's generally how it works. You can't really be middle of the road, right? Bourgeois nationalism exists. That certainly exists, but there you go. Private military and police are a bigger threat than state violence, as state is accountable to the public. Private totalitarian structures are not. Private military and police threat to state. All right, very good. Free Leonard Peltier and free Mumia Abu-Jamal. They shouldn't die in cage like Tom Manning. I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree. In both of those cases, I'll just address that one right now. Both of those cases, right? Mumia Abu-Jamal did not murder Daniel Faulkner. He didn't kill Danny Faulkner. And he just didn't. That's not what happened. The bullets weren't from his gun. There's eyewitnesses who saw other things. The only reason that Mumia Abu-Jamal is still in prison is because he's a former Black Panther. He didn't commit the crime. He did not kill Officer Danny Faulkner. Leonard Peltier did not kill the FBI agents. The evidence seems to indicate that it was friendly fire. The FBI agents were killed by other FBI agents. And the other people who were tried, the other Native American activists who were tried, that's what they convinced the jury of that. But Leonard Peltier was tried separately. He was extradited from Canada. But yes, they need to free Leonard Peltier. They need to free Mumia Abu-Jamal. And let me add, they need to free all Black liberation fighters, former members of the Black Liberation Army, Black Panther Party. They need to free Puerto Rican political prisoners. Senator LaFollette, a couple days ago, right? LaFollette, okay. LaFollette. All right. They need to free all the Puerto Rican fighters. They need to free all the members of the May 19th Communist Organization. And look, the thing is, there needs to just be a blanket amnesty, all right? Because the FBI murdered Black Panthers. It killed Black Panther leaders, Mark Clark, Fred Hampton. They were murdered. It waged a ruthless campaign against the Puerto Rican freedom fighters. It waged a ruthless campaign against Native American activists. We haven't seen all kinds of FBI guys go to jail. We haven't seen all kinds of CIA kind of people go to jail. We haven't seen that. So on the basis of that, there needs to be an amnesty, right? Mumia Abu-Jamal is innocent. Leonard Peltier is innocent. But some of these folks, they did engage in some left adventurous stuff. They thought that was a way to fight for their people. I don't endorse that. I do not believe in violence. No one should break the law. No one should be engaging in terrorism, or I don't endorse any of that. But there needs to be an amnesty. And if I were running for president, that would be my platform. There would be a full pardon for all political prisoners. All political prisoners in the United States, all the people that were involved in anti-imperialist, anti-racist activism from the 60s and 70s, those folks that are still in jail, let them out. Free Jamil Alameen, just let them out. Let them out. Any thoughts on the craziness happening in L.A.? It appears Antifa. I haven't followed that. I haven't followed what's going on in L.A. Red Illuminati. That's something I should know about. I love Caleb Maupin on Dore now. I'd love to go on Jimmy Dore. Jimmy Dore is awesome. All right. Jimmy Carter was the worst president. Yes, I would argue Jimmy Carter was the worst president because he was the turning point when leftism stopped being progressive. All right. Jimmy Carter, it was the solidification of the new left, the anti-working class left. Jimmy Carter, almost everyone from his presidency was from the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission was a think tank set up by Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski and paid for by the Rockefeller family. The Rockefeller family, one of the richest, oil banking dynasties in the United States, gave money to two very evil men, Henry Kissinger and Zbigniew Brzezinski, to set up this maniacally evil think tank called the Trilateral Commission. And the Trilateral Commission developed strategies to reorient the USA in the Cold War and to move the United States toward neoliberal economics. And the Trilateral Commission was awful. They opposed democracy because they thought democracy empowered, ordinary people and could lead to communism. You can read what Noam Chomsky wrote about the Trilateral Commission. The Trilateral Commission was awful. And the entire Jimmy Carter White House was the Trilateral Commission, practically. And it was Jimmy Carter who started the war against the people of Nicaragua and trying to, fight against the Sandinistas. It was Jimmy Carter who started, what they called the Afghan trap, who, set up a situation where the People's Democratic Party of Afghanistan had to come to power prematurely, and then the USA was arming terrorists in Afghanistan, arming Osama bin Laden to fight the Afghan government and eventually the Soviet Union in Afghanistan. Jimmy Carter, he put Paul Volcker in charge of the U.S. economy. And Paul Volcker proceeded to overturn the regulations about the lending of money. So if you have had your home foreclosed or you've been a victim of predatory lending, I think violent criminals who are 80 to 100 years old out. All right. Yeah, I mean, the fact that, that Paul Volcker he overturned state regulations on the lending of money, it was just an awful, it was awful. It was awful for the domestic economy. Jimmy Carter purged the Democratic Party of its labor wing he had the FBI carry out ABSCAM, which stood for Arab Scam, where they had a guy dress up like a Middle Eastern sheik or whatever and go around and try to bribe politicians. And in many cases, the politicians would push the suitcases away and say, we don't want to take that. It didn't matter. They would convict them, right? And they targeted, Democrats who were tied to the Teamsters Union, going after the labor wing of their own party. Jimmy Carter pushed slow growth, the idea that Americans should be poorer, that we should transition to a post-industrial society. Jimmy Carter was not a good president, not a good president in my view. Not a good president. He was transitioning the left away from Roosevelt and socialism and the labor movement and fighting for working families and embracing the kind of pessimistic Rockefeller Malthusian perspective, the idea that the world should be poorer, that we should engage in covert actions to destabilize our enemies. Fight socialism with this covert strategy, roll back the living standards of the domestic population, all in the name of this kind of woke, soft progressivism, draped in like apocalyptic pessimism. The Jimmy Carter White House published the Global 2000 report, which was a document, claiming we needed to reduce the human population drastically. Jimmy Carter started a lot of really bad trends in American politics. He started the Democratic Party in the new left direction, just kind of purged whatever was left of the populism and the optimism of the Roosevelt years, purged it out of there, created, put the synthetic, pessimistic, CIA-linked Trilateral Commission left into power. All right. Okay. Sorry, just pouring myself some more water there. All righty. Authoritarianism equated with Marxism. Well, folks, authoritarianism equated with Marxism. Folks, anarchist bad takes on Cuba. Folks, Marxism is very different than any other ideology that has ever existed. What is ideology? Ideology, imagine you're driving someplace. You're in the car. When you're driving in the car, you know where you're going, you know where you came from, you know how you're getting there. That's ideology. Ideology tells you who you are, tells you where you came from, tells you where you're going, tells you how you're getting there. Ideology is essential for human sanity. If human beings do not have ideology, they become pessimistic. Imagine if you were driving down the road and you didn't know where you were going, didn't know where you came from, didn't know how you were getting there. You would probably stop the car and freak out and go, oh my God. Well, that's what's happening. Postmodernism deprives people of ideology. It says there is no truth, there is no ideology, and as a result, people are going crazy, and they're killing themselves, and they're using drugs, and they are acting wild, and they're feeling like there's no point in life because they have no ideology. Well, the problem is that all ideologies except for Marxism claim to be eternal ideologies, right? The ideology of under feudalism, they claimed there had always been kings and queens, there had always been peasants and landowners, and that was the natural way things are. And they were wrong, right? In ancient Rome, they claimed that the emperor was a god king and that the Roman Empire would always rule the world. They were the natural order. Well, they were wrong. Capitalism claims that it's always been this way. This is human nature. They write science fiction novels where they've still got capitalism in outer space. Well, they're wrong. Marxism is the only ideology that understands that nothing is permanent in the universe, all that is solid melts into air, and that there is no permanent ideology. Marxism understands that human society is constantly in a state of change. I don't know what that is, Chase. Is constantly in a state of change. Constantly in a state of change. And because of that, Marxism understands that authoritarianism in society is rooted in the economic base. It's rooted in the economic base. When a society is very, very, very impoverished, when there is not enough to go around, somebody obviously has to determine who's going to get and who's going to get not. If you have to divide up the food and, everyone only gets a small piece of bread, you're going to have somebody who stands there and makes sure no one takes every other person's piece of bread. Scarcity necessitates authoritarianism. Furthermore, instability necessitates authoritarianism. If a society is having a war, it's being invaded, it's going to have an army to fight those invaders. And that army is going to have people go out and fight and die to fight those invaders. And armies are rather authoritarian institutions. But if a society is stable and it's not being invaded, people can loosen things up. And that the level of authoritarianism in any society is rooted in the level of economic development and the level of prosperity, as well as the level of stability. When societies are very, very impoverished, and there's an extreme level of scarcity, there is an extreme level of authoritarianism. When there is a higher level of prosperity and abundance, there is a less form of authoritarianism, right? Joe Biden and the Council on Foreign Relations and Samantha Power would all like you to believe that everyone is born with natural rights, right? That throughout all of human existence, everyone was born and everyone should always have had freedom of religion, freedom of assembly, freedom of speech, and that this is your God-given right that you must have in all situations. Well, that's interesting. That's really interesting that they think that, because why? If this is your God-given right that all human beings should have in all situations, then why did nobody have it? Why did no one even realize this until the 1400s in Europe? Why? Why did no one think of this until the 1400s in Europe? If this is your God-given right that everyone should have at all times, why did no one think of this? Were human beings evil until John Locke showed up and said life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness? Were human beings evil until the Magna Carta was signed? No. No society had yet achieved the level of economic development. The economic base had not reached a level to necessitate and to create, to lay the basis for a new level of freedom yet. That freedom is linked to economic development. And the goal of Marxism is to create a society with so much abundance, so much prosperity, that we don't even need a government at all, right? That there's more freedom than we can ever imagine. People can just take what they need and do what they want. A post-scarcity society of vast abundance that will eliminate the need for the state. That's what Marxism seeks to do. So that in itself is very anti-authoritarian. We have an ideology that seeks to create enough abundance in society that the need for the state and all coercion can fade away. That is not authoritarianism. However, we understand that in order to get there, we need to have central planning of the means of production. That we as a society, we can't just have the capitalists, the private owners control the means of production. That society as a whole needs to organize the economy in a rational way. Now, according to postmodernists who are anti-ideology, that's authoritarianism. Oh my God, you're going to organize society around your ideology. You're going to organize the economy according to a central plan. Oh my God, you can't do that. Well, I'm sorry. The economy is already organized around the private ownership of capitalists, right? They own the means of production, and they use the means of production to enrich themselves with profits. We say the means of production should be used for the benefit of all society. That's no more authoritarian than what they want. It's just to serve a different group of people. Under their system, the corporations, the banks, the means of production are a dictatorship by those who own them. We argue the banks and the factories and the means of production should be subject to a dictatorship of the proletariat, to the people. The people should control the means of production. And with popular control of the means of production, eliminating the chaos and irrationality of the market, we can create abundance that can lay the basis for eliminating the state, right? And so there you go. Now, they say this is authoritarianism. No, this is no more authoritarian than what already exists. And so there you go. There you go. All right. Is synthetic meat the solution to climate change? I don't think so. I think the solution to climate change is getting beyond fossil fuels. We need to get beyond, oil and natural gas as the basis of our economy. We need fusion energy. Fusion City now. Fusion City now. Now, I don't know very much about synthetic meat, except that I can't stand it. It tastes awful. Synthetic meat tastes awful. I can't stand it. I almost threw up. One time someone tried to just demanded that I try to eat some fake bologna, and it was the grossest thing ever. And one time I ordered some Chinese food, and I ordered chicken, and instead I got fake chicken, and it tasted like I was eating rubber, and no, not a fan. Not a fan. Alrighty. Not a fan. The Stalin School of Falsification by Trotsky. I have read that. A long time ago I read that. It's not one of the well-known Trotsky pamphlets. I've read most of the works of Trotsky. I read The Revolution Betrayed. I read In Defense of Marxism. I read Marxism in Our Time. I read The Permanent Revolution. I've read most of Trotsky's major works, The History of the Russian Revolution, etc. The Stalin School of Falsification is a pamphlet by Trotsky in which he points out that his picture has been removed. There's a famous picture of Lenin giving a speech, and Trotsky's like standing by the podium, and that there's some version of the picture that Stalin was distributing where he'd been wiped out of the picture. He tries to argue that Stalin is falsifying the history of the Russian Revolution in order to downplay Trotsky's role. Well, actually, it's interesting because that pamphlet is in a way kind of a rebuttal, because Trotsky was falsifying his role, in the Russian Revolution. And in fact, if you read Trotsky's history of the Russian Revolution, he does a lot to try and retell the Russian Revolution to make himself appear more sympathetic. Trotsky portrays the Bolsheviks, the Revolutionary Party, the Bolshevik Party, the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, portrays them as if they were a bunch of counter-revolutionary reformists until Lenin showed up in April. They had no idea. They didn't believe in revolution. Oh, but Lenin showed up. He took care of it. Why? Well, that's because Trotsky didn't join the Bolsheviks until July of 1917. So Trotsky has to explain that. He has to justify why he didn't join the Bolsheviks. So there's a chapter in the history of the Russian Revolution by Trotsky where he spends the whole chapter denigrating the Bolsheviks. Just denigrating the Bolsheviks. Why? Well, he wasn't in it. Trotsky also, he tells there's a pamphlet he wrote called Lessons of October, where, Stalin points out that he misrepresents a lot of events. There's a legend about the Russian Revolution. The legend is that, the Bolsheviks were having a meeting, and they were voting on whether or not to seize power. And all the Bolsheviks, they didn't want to do it. They didn't want to do it. But then a worker burst into the meeting and told them, oh, Bolsheviks, if you don't take power, somebody's going to take power. And so the Bolsheviks changed their mind. Well, that's a nice story, but it didn't happen, right? The Bolshevik Central Committee did not meet at random places where people off the street could just walk in at any time and tell them stuff. That's not how it worked. The Bolshevik meetings were held in very, very secure, secret locations. And that's an urban legend. I think it was repeated in John Reed's 10 Days That Shook the World, but it didn't happen. Enjoy it. Thank you, Richard Bruce. Thank you very much for your super chat. Doing the best I can. So there you go. It didn't happen. So, again, history and historical events, they tend to be, we weren't there. We weren't in the room, so we don't know what happened. And, eyewitness accounts are often the worst form of evidence, right? 5 people can see the exact same thing and remember it 5 different ways. And your memory is subject to a filter. right? That's true. Your memory is very biased and subject to a filter. And there can be events in your life that were exactly the same when they happened. And when you're a teenager, you think about your childhood for a moment. Some people can't remember their childhood at all. Some of us can. But think about, there are probably events in your childhood that you remembered one way when you were a teenager, one way when you were a young adult, and one way now, right? Or whatever age you are, right? That as you grow up, the way you see your past changes, right? Because you're perceiving your past through the bias of the present, okay? So is it possible that, at a time when Trotsky was viewed as a traitor and his theory of permanent revolution was repudiated by the Soviet people, is it possible the way that the Soviet Union and their official textbooks and such remembered Trotsky was in a biased way? Sure. Is it possible they made a point of etching him out of pictures? I'm sure they did, right? Trotsky was viewed as a traitor to the Soviet Union, and he was presented that way. And Russian history was told in a way that, that presented him that way. And it's very possible that facts were wrong. Trotsky also got some facts wrong in his history of the Russian Revolution. The Bolsheviks were not counter-revolutionary traitors until Lenin returned from exile, right? The April thesis didn't make the Bolsheviks revolutionaries again. The Bolsheviks were revolutionaries throughout their whole history. The April thesis was a tactical shift, but Trotsky, in his history of the Russian Revolution, he portrays the Bolsheviks in one way, and that there's constantly a struggle to reinterpret the past in order to see things through the lens of the present. And we all have our biases, and anyone who's studied psychology or the human mind realizes that. So the point that Trotsky's making, that, they're falsifying history to make me look bad, I mean, he might have a point, but there was a reason for that. He was viewed as a traitor to the country. What is Engels saying when he says the state stands above the class struggle? Isn't the state a product of class struggle? Isn't it corrected for the ruling class? I think you're talking about how the state presents itself as if it is not serving one class or another. It stands above all society. The state is supposed to not be in service of a class. It speaks in the name of all society. The reality is, though, the state does serve one class or another. Marx refers to Louis Bonaparte as putting himself above all class society, and that there's an attempt on the part of the state to look independent of any class. Is Lenin still seen as the father figure in post-Soviet Russia? No, he's not. Lenin is very unpopular in Russia right now. Stalin is quite popular. I mean, it's about 50-50 from the polls that I've seen. But, Lenin's extremely unpopular in Russia these days. Lenin is seen... Look, the years when Lenin was running Russia were bad years for the country. Civil war, invasion, there you go. I mean, those were bad years in Russian history. And communists like Lenin, that's about it. Non-communists in Russia are not big fans of Lenin. Stalin is remembered as a national hero who defeated the Nazis, who industrialized the country, but, Lenin is liked by communists. That's about it. He said you advocate a peaceful democratic transition to socialism. How do you square this with the revolutionary tradition and history of socialism being overthrown? Is violence unavoidable? I'll write that one down. I will write it down. Unavoidable. All right. Thank you, Paragus. All righty. We're going to get through these. All right. The Zapatistas. Well, the Zapatistas, they are an indigenous separatist movement of folks in Chiapas, indigenous folks in Chiapas. And because they have not aligned themselves with the Bolivarian movement, they made a point of not having a relationship with Bolivarianism. And because they're not friendly to AMLO, because of that, they are not really a center of the struggle right now. I mean, in Chiapas, they still have a lot of influence, but they're not really the leaders at this point of the main force of opposition to imperialism and such. So there you go. All right. Private military and police is a threat to the state. I wouldn't say they're a threat to the state because they couldn't exist if they were in contradiction to the state. Private military and private policing agencies tend to work hand in hand with the state. Here in New York, there are various community patrols. Here in New York, there's a lot of private security guards, but they're not in opposition to the state. Look, if you formed a private security force that was anti-government, they would be on your ass. They'd be on your ass many, many times. They would be on your ass. So, no, private military, private policing agencies, they work in coordination with the state. They're owned by private companies, but they do not function in opposition to the state. They are generally, para-state in their operation. So it's like private prisons. Like they're not competing with regular prisons. I mean, they imprison people, in the same court system. So yeah, you're a little confused there. Like militia groups might be in contradiction to the state, and the government does monitor those groups very, very closely. But as far as no, you're wrong there. La Follette, Congressman La Follette, or La Follette, or La Follette, very progressive figure. The Farmer Labor Party was who he was associated with. The La Follette movement, it was a populist left-wing movement in the 1920s. Wasn't so good on the issue of race, from what I understand. Was not really anti-racist, but it was pro-labor. It was against big business. So there you go. So there you go. The La Follette movement, the Communist Party related to it. The Communist Party pushed for the formation of the Federated Farmer Labor Party. There was something called the Conference for Progressive Political Action, the CPPA, that was around. That was like a very important, kind of left-wing association that existed. The Communist Party was part of it and maneuvered within it during the 1920s. Eventually, the CPPA, which was aligned with Robert La Follette, they formed the farmer labor parties, around the country. I think it's in Wisconsin. It's either in Wisconsin or Minnesota, one of the states. Well, either Wisconsin or Minnesota. I can't remember which one. The Democratic Party is not the Democratic Party. It's the DFL. It's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. Still, they have the Farmer Labor Party in their name. But around the country, they formed farmer labor parties that were aligned with Robert La Follette. There was the Conference for Progressive Political Action. And then later, the Conference for Progressive Political Action, they kind of became, like in the 30s, they morphed into Trotskyites. They formed the American Workers' Party. And A.J. Musty was a leader that came out of that strand. It was a current of kind of left-wing socialistic politics in the 1920s. The Communist Party worked with them in the 20s. The Trotskyites worked with them in the 30s. That was, it was, the Congress for Progressive Political Action, and Senator Robert La Follette, who was pro-labor, wasn't so good on race, from what I understand. He was not thoroughly anti-racist, which was a big problem with him. But he was a progressive, right? He was he was associated. He wasn't a Marxist, but he was associated with the farmer labor parties. What is it? There's a socialist country song. Minnesota, that's where it's the Democratic Farmer Labor Party. And that was the La Follette movement, or La Follette movement. I don't remember which way you pronounce it. La Follette, La Follette. There's a country song that was part of that, right? I don't want your millions, mister. I don't want your diamond rings. All I want is the right to live, mister. So give me back my job again. And there's many verses to that. But then the last one of the verses is, take your two big parties, mister. No difference in them I can see. But with the Farmer Labor Party, oh, we can set our people free. Yeah. I don't want your millions, mister. It's like a slow country song supporting the Farmer Labor Party. I don't care much for colors, mister. You can call me green or blue or red. I don't know, but my hungry children must be fed. Yeah, that's the Farmer Labor Party. That's Robert La Follette. So there you go. I'm having a great time, folks. Thanks for letting me have fun with you all. All right. What do you think about letting violent criminals who are 80 to 100 years old out? They have things like that. I think they call it compassionate release. Like if someone has cancer, they generally let you out to die with your relatives. They have some of that, but, largely, it would depend on a case-by-case basis, right? You couldn't have a blanket rule around something like that. It would have to be decided. You'd have to have, you know, there'd have to be like a situation where a judge could do that, where you could appeal for that, and a judge would have to approve it. I don't think you could make a blanket rule. What, are we going to let Bill Cosby out just because he's, when we did, right? But it wasn't because of his age. But, you know, I mean, what if the guy commits the violent crime when he's 80? Does he go to jail? And then they go, oh, he's 80 years old, we let him out. I mean, it depends on the situation. In most cases, yeah, if someone, you know, is 80 and they committed a crime 40 years ago, I let him out of jail. People being in jail is always a bad thing. It's always a bad thing. You know, the goal of a society should be to have as few people locked up as ever. We should ultimately aim for a society without prisons, right? That should be the ultimate goal, a stateless, classless world. So, you know, I am generally opposed to incarceration. In some cases, though, murderers, rapists, pedophiles, narco gang, drug dealers, there's obviously cases, child kidnappers, rapists. I mean, come on, there's obviously people who belong in prison in our society, and we still, as a society, produce people who need to be locked up. But overwhelmingly, the goal of any society should be to get beyond that. I mean, we should try to minimize the amount of people in prison. Society is hurt by having people in prison. It hurts all of society. Prisons are not good places, right? And people having prisons is bad for all of society, I would argue. It's not a good thing. One thing I would ban would be prison labor, right? Because companies hiring people in jail and they can pay them less than a minimum wage. No, they're taking jobs away from people on the outside. Right? Prison labor, sure, if you have the prisoners do work to maintain the prison, that's one thing. But prisoners working for private companies, that needs to be outlawed right now. They need to get rid of that right now. Great talk as always. Oh, thank you very much. I'm doing the best I can. Doing the best I can, Bert. Doing the best I can. All right. Anarchist bad takes on Cuba. Yeah, what's interesting, I've known a lot of folks who've gone to Cuba, and they've talked about the urban gardens that they've created and how neighborhoods in urban areas in Cuba, they've done a lot, and a lot of anarchists go to Cuba and are very impressed with the hip hop and the punk rock scene in Cuba, the Cuban punk movement, the Cuban hip hop movement. A lot of anarchist folks are really impressed with the urban gardens and the environmentalism in Cuba. They're really big on environmentalism, on using resources in a rational way, and urban gardens. They got gardens on their rooftops, and there's a lot of anarchists who are pretty impressed with Cuba. Now, Cuba's not an anarchist country. It's run by a Marxist-Leninist party, but there's a lot of anarchists who go on the Venceremos Brigade trips to Cuba, and they like what they see. The fact that, the bread tube voices, bread tube doesn't represent anarchism, right? And I talk about that in the new book, right? Peter Kropotkin was not a bad dude, right? He's not my political ideology, but he was a supporter of the Bolsheviks, a supporter of the Russian Revolution. They named a subway station after him in the Soviet Union. Peter Kropotkin was a good dude for the most part, made some mistakes in his life, but he was overwhelmingly a person who dedicated his life to fighting for the peasantry and the oppressed. Emma Goldman was a great person, right? Lucy Parsons was a great woman, right? The Wobblies, Joe Hill. There's a lot of great anarchists in history. So, Jabba the Bosch, who's like, Cuba said he was a dictatorship. He doesn't represent anarchism. That's not anarchism, right? That's not anarchism. You can have your criticism of the Cuban government or whatever, but, Jabba the Bosch, who's on there, saying, if you don't agree that Syria gassed its own people, then you are the same as a neo-Nazi. He doesn't represent anarchism. That's not anarchism. Bread tube is not anarchism. It's not social democracy. It's definitely not Marxism. It's liberal State Department crap. Alrighty. How do you advocate a peaceful transition to socialism when there's a history of violence? Well, this is, again, you need to think about what I said here. I advocate a peaceful transition to socialism, meaning if you ask me what I believe in, I will tell you that I believe in a peaceful transition to socialism. That is what I advocate, right? It's not necessarily what I think we're going to get, right? The ruling class could be very violent, right? Abraham Lincoln took office. He didn't even want to abolish slavery. He wanted to peacefully stop slavery from expanding, and the ruling class was violent to Abraham Lincoln. So Abraham Lincoln was forced to form a coalition and, mobilized the federal government and Harriet Tubman and the abolitionists and the labor unions and the northern industrial capitalists to defend democracy. I'm not opposed to self-defense, right? And yes, if the ruling class prevents a peaceful transition to socialism and begins to impede on people's democratic rights, and people are forced to defend themselves and defend the democratic process, I'm not opposed to that, right? I wouldn't be opposed. Lincoln had every right to put down the slave revolt, had every right to put down the slaveholders and their uprising against the government in order to defend slavery. He had every right to do that, right? To defend the democratic process, right? The Spanish Republic had every right to try and crush Franco and his regime, right? If Salvador Allende had been able to put Pinochet in jail, he would have had every right to do that. Hugo Chavez had every right to jail the oppositionists who led a coup against him, right? And that, yes, when violent revolutions happen historically, they are acts of self-defense. It's when people have no choice. They're facing a threat, right? And they are forced to defend themselves. But Marxists, serious Marxists and revolutionaries never advocate violence. They advocate a peaceful transition to socialism. They organize the people on the basis of building a peaceful transition to socialism, and the people get involved in mobilizing and building up their communities, building up popular power, right? And if the capitalists choose to be violent and to violently attack people and try to prevent the democratic process from being carried out, communists defend the right of people to defend themselves. They believe in self-defense. And all revolutions in history are acts of self-defense. And it's the capitalists who choose the violent revolution. It's the working people who want a peaceful transition. Working people want a peaceful transition. It's the capitalists who say, oh, no, we're going to be violent and force a violent revolution to occur. And that's an important thing. Communists never go around advocating violence. Communists never go around advocating a violent revolution, advocating civil war, advocating terrorism. If you do that, you are not a serious Marxist, because working people, the working class, they have violence in their lives. They have violence in their schools. They have violence in their homes. They have violence in their neighborhoods. It's the working class that has to go and fight all the wars these imperialists wage, right? So, if you are going around advocating violence, that's not working class. That's juvenile. That's left adventurism. That's childishness. But it is not the correct Marxist position. Marxists put forward their program, right? They put forward their program, right? Which is transitioning to socialism. And in order, if they can get elected and they can enact that program, in order to do it, they need to change the nature of the state. In order to enact a socialist program, you would need to change the nature of the state. The military would have to change. The police would have to change. The intelligence apparatus would have to change. You couldn't build socialism with the FBI. You couldn't build socialism with the Pentagon. You couldn't build socialism with the CIA. You couldn't build socialism with the NYPD. You would have to create new institutions to serve popular power. So in addition to carrying out your economic program, you would then need to change the nature of the state and create the dictatorship of the proletariat. And then, with the dictatorship of the proletariat, you could go from your Popular Front program to socialism, right? We advocate a Popular Front program. We advocate the election of a Popular Front government that would take dramatic changes to improve the lives of working people. And the program, the political program advocated by the Center for Political Innovation is, first, a mass mobilization to rebuild the country. Second, public control of natural resources. Third, public control of banking. And fourth, an enactment of an economic bill of rights. We propose the creation of Fusion City as the solution to climate change, right? A global unified effort to get fusion energy and get us off fossil fuels. We propose the Sandino-Zapata Economic Corridor, a program of economic development for Mexico and for Guatemala and Honduras and Central America to deal with the problem of immigration. That's our program. We advocate our program, right, of transitioning, and we rally around the slogan, we need a government of action to fight for working families, right? That's our program. Marxists advocate their program first. Then, in order to carry out their program, the nature of the state would have to change, right? And once the state is changed, the state can move on to enact full socialism. And this is the way Marxists advocate. Even violent revolutions, right, are carried out. The violent revolution, right, the Bolsheviks, they took power, peace, land, and bread. They said, we want peace, land, and bread. They wanted to do it peacefully, but the capitalists weren't going to allow it. They had the Kornilov reaction. They were suppressing the Bolsheviks, and the Bolsheviks defeated the Kornilov reaction, defeated General Kornilov. They were able to then declare the Soviet government, their dual government structure, to be the government, and then from there they created socialism. Right, in China it was land to the tiller. They wanted to redistribute land. They wanted to defeat the Japanese invaders. And on that basis, they mobilized the public. They wanted to have a coalition government with Chiang Kai-shek, but he wouldn't have it. Chiang Kai-shek was actively trying to disarm the communists and tell them they had to give up their armed self-defense, and they couldn't redistribute land. So the communists were forced to fight for their democratic rights, and it was, again, on the basis of their program, redistribute land, defeat Japan, etc. And then they created a new state, the People's Republic, and then with the new state, they were able to create socialism, right? These are three stages: the Popular Front, the creation of the United Front, the Popular Front, the Revolutionary Program, the changing of the state, the creation of a new state apparatus, and then the creation of socialism. And this is the brilliance of William Z. Foster and other Marxists, right? If you read the Communist Manifesto, they have 10 planks that the Communist League wanted. The communists of Marx's day. Did Marx go around telling everyone we want violence? No. He said, here's 10 things we believe in: public education, income tax, a central bank to plan the economy, breaking down the difference between the city and the countryside. You read the 10 planks of the Communist Manifesto. Some of them don't seem that radical, but that was their program. That was their program, right? If you read Marxists everywhere, they have a program around which a united front can be built. Then, the enacting of that program would require a new kind of government. And then with that new kind of government, you can build full socialism. That's how these things work. On that note, folks, I must say good night. It's been a lovely time talking to all of you. I'm glad we could just hop on and do this quick stream. A new upsurge in the struggle against U.S. imperialism is now emerging throughout the world. Ever since World War II, U.S. imperialism and its followers have been continuously launching wars of aggression. But the people of various countries have been continuously waging revolutionary wars to defeat their aggression. And while the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. While the danger of a new world war still exists and the people of all countries must get prepared, revolution is the main trend in the world today. Good night.